All right, Numbers 35, let's call this one deliberately, even though that term literally comes out of Hebrews chapter 10. It's where we're going to hopefully end up to discuss the distinction between murder and manslaughter that we're going to see discussed here in Numbers 35, which really comes in the larger context of a portion of the law that is taking breaks periodically to deal with two classes of people. Those who are often overlooked, as we saw with the daughters of Zelophehad, who, through their realization that they were overlooked because they had no brothers to whom their father's inheritance would fall, they were being overlooked, and they ended up creating a branch of case law that would help women in a similar situation throughout the nation of Israel. Likewise, in chapter 30, we looked at the ways in which a daughter or a wife could find relief or a second chance from a vow rashly uttered. And so now we're going to look at the ways in which someone who kills unintentionally can get a second chance in chapter 35. But it is distinguished from intentional murder, because the cities of refuge that are carved out here are only for those who kill unintentionally. How do we know? Because in verse 15, it's going to say, "These 6 cities shall be for refuge for the people of Israel, and for the stranger, and for the sojourner among them, that anyone who kills any person without intent may flee there." And so that is the caveat. But what about intentional sins? Well, this chapter also falls in line with another trend, and that is the discussion that we've talked about before in the sacrificial system, which really generally makes provisions for unintentional sins. Once again, in that line of manslaughter. How do we know? Let's go back to Numbers 15, where verse 30 it reads, "But the person who does anything with a high hand, whether he is a native or a sojourner, reviles the Lord. And that person shall be cut off from among his people, because he has despised the word of the Lord and has broken his commandment. That person shall be utterly cut off. His iniquity shall be on him." It's one of those points at which we will often say, whew, thank goodness we're not under the old law. But the reason I pulled the term deliberately from the new covenant as opposed to the old is this is still a New Testament concept. There's a little bit more relief in the new covenant, but maybe not what we're typically taught, sometimes by even our favorite teachers. Why? Because in Hebrews chapter 10, it's going to say in verse 26, "For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful expectation of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries. Anyone who has set aside the law of Moses dies without mercy on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much worse punishment do you think will be deserved by the one who has trampled underfoot the Son of God and has profaned the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified and has outraged the Spirit of grace? For we know him who said, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay.' And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God." And I wanted to take a pause here because we often say in interpreting the Bible, we get a gift when we have a New Testament scholar interpret the word for us. And that's exactly what's going on here. Why? Because this writer of Hebrews is pointing back to the law where we are right now, where it distinguishes between intentional and unintentional sins. And he is explaining to believers the consequences of going on and continuing to sin deliberately after we've been forgiven. And he's not alone, because John is going to say in his epistle in 1 John chapter 3, beginning of verse 7, "Little children, let no one deceive you. Whoever practices righteousness is righteous, as he is righteous. Whoever makes a practice of sinning is of the devil, for the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. No one born of God makes a practice of sinning, for God's seed abides in him, and he cannot keep on sinning, because he has been born of God. By this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother." And so understand, sometimes it's important just to take a step back instead of making a super practical point, to make a doctrinal point that is super practical. Since most of the word's encouragement comes in describing God as being larger than our most intimidating habits, stronger than our willpower, and willing to help us overcome even our most embarrassing flaws if we will simply let him help us exchange our ways for his, which is why we often say his best to you as you go forward in him.